The International Association for Near-Death Studies presents NDE Radio, a weekly exploration of near-death experiences and similar encounters with the other side. Now, here's your host, Lee Witting.
Welcome to NDE Radio, brought to you by IANDS, the International Association for Near-Death Studies. I'm your host, Lee Witting. Well, today we have the pleasure of continuing with Dr. Deno Kazanis, who has been talking about the reintegration of physics and science generally with the mystical. And he has studied both extensively. Deno received his doctorate in biophysics at the State University of Pennsylvania, and served as a Peace Corps volunteer, where he acquainted himself with Africa, giving his service in Nigeria and Kenya. In addition, he studied Tibetan Buddhism. He has studied with the former physician to His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and has studied Qigong with probably far more discipline than I ever gave to my study of it, and has authored an amazing little book called The Reintegration of Science and Spirituality. We're going to pick up where we left off last week. If you have not listened to last week's show, I would strongly suggest that you go back to our past shows button and listen to what we were talking about last week. Deno, welcome to NDE Radio once again.
Thank you.
Where we left off was a fairly long discussion of the nature of dark matter and its correlation to subtle bodies in the mystical, and primarily, and I guess the history of the mystical, going back to the Middle Ages and back as far as Egypt and perhaps before that. And dark matter, just for the audience's sake, is unlike normal matter, because normal matter for us is the things that we see and the things that we touch. But that only makes up about 5% of stuff in the universe. The rest of it, the vast majority of it, is this invisible, untouchable dark matter and dark energy. Now, I wanted to ask you, as a starting question, in your book, you quote C.W. Leadbeater as saying the soul of man has not one body, but many bodies. And I got this image of Russian nesting dolls, souls within souls. How do you explain what he's driving at?
Well, what I think really he's pointing out is that there are multiple subtle bodies. So I think, to my mind, one of the subtle bodies, as I mentioned, is the soul, and that's the part of us which reincarnates. So, in fact, I would define the soul, for my purposes, as the part of us which reincarnates. So it's a very, 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 very subtle matter. It's much more subtle than the etheric matter, or what they call in the East the pranic matter. So it's much more subtle than that. So it's several layers back. So again, what we're talking about is really multiple periodic tables, multiple types of atoms. The only ones that are made of charged matter are the ones we see in our daily life, in our normal state of consciousness. In the East, that would be called the ana matter. And to me, I would just call it charged matter. Other types of matter they talk about in the East are the prana matter, mano matter, vijnana matter. Actually, those are the names of the subtle bodies. So I think each of those subtle bodies is a unique form of matter. So what these Leadbeater is talking about are, all of those bodies that are normally invisible to us. And they really don't sit on layers outside of us. They're part of them might be outside of us, but they're actually within us. The reason they can be within us is because they're not made of charged matter. So they can interpenetrate our visible body, which is made up of charged matter.
Oh.
And there's a lot of external phenomena going on involving that matter as well, which is totally invisible to us. So that's one of the simpler pictures that I'm talking about using, you might say, the Indian system of 4 or 5 subtle bodies.
Now, let me ask you, when we have an out-of-body experience, we can't touch things. Our hands apparently pass right through things, but we can see them. I mean, when somebody rises up out of their body during an operation, they can see the doctors trying to restart their heart. They can see all of the equipment being used. And even though they can float through a wall and not be stopped by it, they can see the what we call the real world on the other side. So is that a transitional space that we're in at that point?
Yeah, we usually refer to that as the astral body that actually moves out and travels. And it is interesting that we can see that, but the more subtle bodies seem to be like inclusive of the other bodies, that they can, to a certain extent, interact with them. So the astral body can really interact to a certain extent with the charged body or the visible body, but it can also see it. So these are really things that need to be explored much deeply. As you get into the more subtle bodies, like the mental body, it seems to be inclusive of the astral body and the etheric body and the visible body. So, but the mental body seems to have to, according to what the mystics seem to say, that like if you talk about the mental body, it really has to interact with the visible body through the astral body and the etheric body. It doesn't interact with it directly.
Do you see physics description of what's described in the Tibetan Book of the Dead as the bardo?
The bardo, I would again think that that's really the after-death experience, deals primarily with the soul, which is going to be moving on in the bardo, which refers really to the gap, into another yet to be determined or another body. That's got to be a very, very different state of mind from what we normally encounter. I tell you, the states of mind of some of these subtle body experiences are so other that people often have a difficult time not only talking about them, but even remembering them to talk about. So it's, again, it's remarkable that like the Tibetans have developed this book that talks about the experience between death and rebirth. And it's as good as I guess you can do to communicate with our consciousness on this level.
You had a lovely quote from Dante Alighieri in the opening of your book, part of which was, "I have seen things which cannot be told possibly by anyone who comes down from there." And in a way, that's what you're saying, that it's so hard to put these things into words, which of course is what NDEers tell me all the time. It's so hard to describe what I saw. Let me ask you a physical question that's always crossed my mind when I hear stories of near-death experiences. How does the soul or the subtle body communicate what it experienced to the physical brain, which is what's relating the story to another person?
Boy, well, that's really tough. I think, I mean, just the ability of some of these mystics to convey any of the information they're getting on those very subtle levels is really remarkable. You know, I really feel that all religions, the core of all religions is somebody who had a profound experience on the highest level that is even beyond imagination, that you can't really communicate it to anybody else. I mean, there's just no way. You can't use words, you can't use images. It's, if it's beyond imagination, it's beyond everything we know. And it's not. And I think every religion starts with that, and then they kind of have to make up to a certain extent. They try to talk about those profound experiences, or which they know no one's going to understand, or it's going to be misinterpreted, and in some ways they just may have to make stuff up to get us to comprehend. It's not only the great spiritual teachers, unfortunately, because it's so uncommunicable that it gets easily lost after even a generation or two. But it's not only the great spiritual teachers. You can go back to the philosophers like Plato, who points out quite clearly that when he uses that allegory in the cave, I mean, he just says, everybody's looking at these shadows. One person breaks away, is able to see the reality where the shadows are coming from, but he cannot possibly communicate what's going on to the people who are stuck looking at the shadows. And if he tries to, he says, for sure they'll think I'm crazy. And this is the predicament that anybody who's had a profound spiritual experience is in. If you try to talk about it, for sure, you will think them crazy. Most people would. Most people keep these experiences to themselves. Spiritual teachers tend to try to develop at least methods for people to have these experiences. And that's why all these techniques of rituals and such were developed to get people into higher states of consciousness. It usually starts with some sort of a basic meditation, but it's it's a difficult path to get there, and obviously not too many of us do. And you can spend a lot of time trying to, but it's always worth the effort. As far as you can, I guess.
In your own experience with all the study you did, have you found that you can rise to a higher state of meditation?
At this point, I'm not too pleased with my state of meditation, but I have had some, I'd say, enough of a glimpse in my lifetime to at least be convinced that mystical teachings, are real. And everybody has maybe a preferred way of talking about it. I really like the way Plato discusses it, even though he doesn't talk about methods. Apparently, Plato went to the Pythagorean school and probably had his Enlightenment experience there. But at the Pythagorean school, people apparently were sworn to secrecy. So I don't think you don't find any of the teachings. So what's lacking for me in Plato is only that there really isn't a methodology to reach these experiences. And I suppose it's safer that way, because often this is difficult, or it can get you into trouble trying to do it on your own without, having a teacher. But I also, of course, very much like Taoism and Tibetan Buddhism and Zen Buddhism. I kind of prefer the teachings that are what you could say are non-theistic, where you're not dealing with the concept of God, because I've just seen too much teachings go too far astray. All religions have that potential, but somehow in our Western world, when we have people actually preaching hatred as some sort of spiritual practice, it's just discourages one very much so.
Certainly does, especially these days.
Yeah, it's just crazy.
I wanted to ask you, being myself Christian, there's if in your book, there's a discussion of if matter is not held together or the particles are not electric by nature, could they possibly be held together by chi energy?
Well,
And I thought maybe you could describe what chi is and how that might work.
okay. Well, what I would say with chi or prana, and sometimes chi is used for various levels, but I would tend to view prana or chi as a form of matter, just like we have atoms that with positively charged nucleus and electron going about it. Well, chi has same type of structure. You have some sort of nucleus with some sort of particle traveling around it. And much like the electron can emit electromagnetic waves, the chi matter can also emit what I would call chi waves, which can produce some sort of vision. So I see it as very analogous to everyday charged matter, but it's more subtle, more profound, and more capable, closer to, you could say, the mind matter, and maybe more influenced by it. But you really have to. I just see it as other types of atoms loose in the universe, but playing a very vital role. If you look at the chakras in the body, and the nadis, we have a central channel that's made up of this chi or prana going right up the center of us. And we have two smaller channels going up each side of it. And these are utilized a lot in the Kundalini practices along with the chakras. So they are structures that they're just made of different matter. They're different, and they're more necessary. I mean, we couldn't exist without the subtle bodies. We just don't know that.
I often, when I just coming out of a Christian tradition, I often compare chi to the Holy Spirit, or grace flowing down, to put it in more Christian terms. But Qigong is a powerful study. I got a lot out of it in the couple of years that I was doing it. I wanted to ask you, while we still have time, about, I guess it's is it Sheldrake that talks about the Gaia hypothesis, that Earth has subtle bodies of its own, and that there's a consciousness that the Earth itself, and the nonosphere, I guess that's the other term for it.
Yeah, and I forget who talked about that. Rupert Sheldrake mostly talks about, let's see, what does he call those?
Morphogenesis.
Morphogenesis, right. He deals more with the idea of morphogenesis, but to me, what he's really talking about are subtle bodies. I find a lot of people who get into these phenomenal experiences start developing their own languages for whatever reason. Sometimes they'll borrow it from others, but yeah, I also feel that Gaia is real. I mean, I think the Earth is really immersed in dark matter or subtle matter, which would not be surprising, and it is we can have a communication with that, and I do think the points of Jung and Freud developing the idea of the unconscious, I think, is really profound. I think most of that unconscious can be connected with, again, subtle matter and subtle bodies. So I think there's a lot. I mean, if science can open up to these subtle phenomena through, the analysis of dark matter, there's a lot that science can bring to the table here, things that we really don't know yet.
What about quantum? How do you integrate quantum into your studies?
Well, basically, to my mind, quantum mechanics has two things that really told us about. One is that matter isn't solid, that most of the matter is concentrated in a very small nucleus, so that it's things can kind of pass through it. The other thing quantum brings to mind is our knowledge that on the atomic level or subatomic level, that even objects really don't bump into each other or touch. They all interact through forces. So if there's not a force interacting between two objects, they will pass right through each other. There's nothing to prevent them from doing so. And right now at this point, I mean, there's only, we could say, 5 basic forces in the universe. There's the nuclear force, the strong and the weak, that's 2 of them. There's the electromagnetic force, which is, and point out, is our entire consciousness in this world, our common world, because we exist in a world of atoms made of charge, and that's what we experience all the time. And of course, there's gravity, which we really don't experience directly. And then there's the Higgs force, or the Higgs boson, which was presumably recently discovered. So those are all the forces they know right now. But if there are other types of atoms in this universe, there will be a lot more forces discovered that these more subtle atoms interact through. It'll be a different window.
Now that that particle that they discovered in CERN, the boson, which they called the God particle, somewhere I read that is what makes matter possible. That physical matter is materialized on account of that particle.
Yeah, basically, you could say it slows down matter or energy, you could say, to the point where it becomes matter-like. So, we may hear more about that. There could be more interesting stories. The thing about the Higgs boson they discovered is that the mass they were expecting it to be is way off from what the theory was predicting. So they, in time, something else may come of that as they discover more and more dark matter. One of the things I like to point out too is that right now they are trying to discover dark matter through the Large Hadron Collider by slamming protons together and hopefully producing dark matter out of it, which they hope they know how to detect. But I keep feeling they're working backwards, because it isn't protons that created dark matter. It was dark matter that created protons. So I think they can slam those protons together for as long as they want. I don't think they're going to find any dark matter. They may find something they think is dark matter. And one other thing I like to point out is that they may already have discovered a dark matter particle, and it would be the neutrino, which is an uncharged particle. But dark matter cannot be made up of all the dark matter in the universe, can't be made up of neutrinos. They're well aware of that. But what the neutrino nevertheless could be like a part of a dark matter atom. In fact, the neutrino could play a part of the electron in a dark matter atom. And what that's something I suggested once upon a time. And the reason I like that idea is that it's like the electron. The lepton is the neutrino is a lepton. They're both leptons, so they have, like, in a sense, similar properties. But their mass is astronomically different. So the neutrino is probably, the mass is so small they've never been able to measure it. They can just give an upper limit on it. And it would probably be like 1 billionth the mass of the electron, which is not all that great. 1 millionth, that could mean instead of there being 4 or 5 times the mass, dark matter makes up maybe 4 or 5 times as much mass as there is visible matter. It could be 4 or 5 million times if as far as the number of atoms go. So, I mean, it could be literally, it could be these atoms of subtle matter could be astronomically greater in number. So there are all kinds of things that could exist that we have no idea. So way beyond our imagination, even on that level.
Mm-hmm. Do you suppose that time would be a dimension within dark matter, or is that an existence that could exclude time?
I think what people have what mystics have discovered is when you get into the consciousness of these other forms of matter, that time is quite different, time and space. So I think the matter that one is conscious of creates a time and space, and it's all one thing. Matter, time, are kind of one large group of stuff. And it gets, the time gets very, 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 you could say, slow. I've heard some teachers talk about entering some very subtle aspects of matter where time is essentially a standstill. It's moving very, very, very slow. So I think that's quite real. When you get all the way to pure consciousness, of course, there is no time or space. There's just consciousness.
Right. That's when the consciousness of objects disappears and pure consciousness emerges. That's I guess Evans Wentz wrote about that at the moment of death. That's what happens.
Yeah. Well, maybe for him, maybe for some of us, there's a subtle amount of time, but it's certainly a different time in the bardo. I would say a different sense of time completely. Yeah. Even in our dreams, we have a different sense of time and space.
Oh yes, and people who've only been dead for a matter of seconds will come back feeling like they've been in that other area for weeks or even months, that they experienced so much, and really they were resuscitated within a minute.
Yeah, it's just very different. So I'm sure there are mystics who have had a lot of these experiences who probably could go into great detail on it, but what I'm doing is just giving a basic outline. In fact, my book is really just kind of a basic outline of what's potentially out there. Clearly, people have written paragraphs, books on almost every section of my book, literally.
Yeah. Do you think ultimately that there'll be a coming together, a meeting of the minds of spirituality and science?
I do eventually, not in my lifetime, but I'm hoping they will just get to the point where they recognize that there might be other atoms in the universe, and that may begin when they discover that maybe dark matter existed before the Big Bang. So I'm hoping those two things happen. I don't have to mention spirituality with those two ideas. I could just say there's other types of matter, and why don't you take a look and see if dark matter could have existed before the Big Bang?
Well, that's true. That's probably the only way that science will ever acknowledge it, is if they can delineate scientifically what that spiritual world is all about.
Right, and I don't have to mention spirituality to get them to look at that.
Although they may be intrigued by your study of Eastern religions, though. I think that will add a lot of drama to an otherwise dull spiritual scientific lecture. Anyway, I believe we're out of time once again, Deno, and I want to thank you so much for doing the 2 shows with us. And I hope that people go out and buy your book, because I found it really fascinating. And tell them again where they can get the Reintegration of Science and Spirituality.
Yeah, it is available on Amazon as a paperback and as Kindle.
Oh, very good. Very good. Well, thanks so much. And if listeners would like to listen to the first show you did with us, or listen to this show again, just go to our past shows button at TalkZone and NDE Radio, and that will be there along with all of our almost 400 shows that we have done over the 7 years. Join us again next Monday, 11 a.m. Eastern, for more NDE Radio. This is Lee Witting saying thanks for listening.